Hello everybody and welcome to my League Start guide for the Bladestorm champion. If you're looking for a fast build to play in 3.26, then boy do I have a treat for you. Bladestorm is a melee skill that hits enemies in a big circle. Every time we swing our weapon, we leave behind a storm that lingers and continues to deal damage. This lends itself pretty nicely to a mobile playstyle where we can hit once, leave behind some storms, and they will finish the enemy. For single target, we stand in one area and attack continuously, and the storms will stack up on the same enemy to deal more damage. There's more to be said about this skill, but I'll leave the details for later. Let's talk about the champion ascendancy and why I picked it for our League Start. The champion brings both damage and survivability to the table. Master of a Metal gives us flat physical damage and flat armor. Both of these are incredible when your gear is trash. Fortitude gives us Fortify, and this reduces the damage we take from hits. Unstoppable Hero increases our damage and defenses, and it also lets us further invest into Fortify so we can scale armor, evasion, and attack speed in the mid to late game. And then there's the first to strike, last to fall node. This is going to give us access to the Intimidate and Adrenaline mechanics, both of which improves our clear speed. Long story short, guys, the champion was already a solid starter with a high floor and a low ceiling. In 3.26, we're getting some buffs, and that's going to facilitate endgame scaling, giving us a chance to invest and get stronger so that we no longer fall off a cliff after finishing Atlas progression. With the Ascendancy overview out of the way, let's talk about the offensive and defensive layers for this build. This is a physical damage non-crit build that scales its damage through Impale. We start by focusing on increasing our chance to impale and ignore enemy physical damage reduction. Once we have a 100% chance to impale, we then want to improve our damage by getting the impales to last an additional hit. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the impale mechanic, I'll explain it in more detail later in the video. Our last layer of offense is going to be through the Bloodthirst support gem, which is going to increase our flat physical damage when we are on low life. For our defenses, we're going to keep it simple by focusing on armor to start. This is going to mitigate incoming physical damage. Then we'll take Unwavering Stance for stun immunity. We're playing a two-handed build and it's going to be slow. You don't want to be stunned while swinging your weapon. Then we'll use Purity of Elements to get ailment immunity, and we'll invest into Fortify so that we take less damage from hits. By the time we are in red maps, we'll also be running the Petrified Blood Reservation. This is for a low life setup. Petrified Blood offsets a portion of the damage we take. It's going to give you access to the Overleech mechanic, and it's going to enable permanent uptime of the Adrenaline buff from our Ascendancy. With some modest rare items, we can expect to have around 6,000 life by level 90, and drain tank our way through most things as long as we're able to attack and deal damage. With the build overview out of the way, let's get into skill gem progression. We want to start our journey off with Spectral Throw. Equip the strongest two-handed weapon you can find and throw it at your enemies as you make your way towards the end of Act 1. The skill is a projectile attack that pierces and returns, dealing damage to any enemies it passes through. For the more advanced players out there, be sure to aim for that weak spot so you get multiple hits on the same enemy. This is going to help you in that single target damage. I recommend using Spectral Throw in a 3-link green setup with momentum and faster attack support. At level 12, we want to swap to Sunder. This is a slam skill that crushes the ground to deal damage in front of you. Enemies hit by this ability will create smaller shockwaves. Those shockwaves will then deal damage to enemies in a circle around them. Equip a two-handed axe or mace and aim for dense packs of enemies when using this skill. The resulting shockwaves are going to overlap and kill most things in 1 or 2 hits. I recommend using Sunder in a 3-link red-green setup with melee physical damage and faster attacks support. At level 28, we swap to Bladestorm. We've already talked about this skill briefly, but now it's time to get into the details. Bladestorm is a melee skill that hits enemies in a big circle. Every time we swing our weapon, we leave behind a storm that lingers and continues to deal damage. By default, we can have 3 storms, 4 if you 20% quality it, and each of these storms will last 3 seconds and deal 50% of your initial hit damage. There's also two types of storms we need to know about. Bloodstorm is created when we are in blood stance. It has a smaller radius, is stationary, increases our attack speed when we stand in it, and it deals more damage with bleeds. Sandstorm is created when we are in sand stance, and this one has a larger radius, moves outwards towards enemies, and increases our movement speed while we stand in it. We swap between the stances using a stance skill like Blood and Sand. This gives us agency over what storms we want to create and when. For a single target, we're going to stand still and hold down our attack button to stack Bloodstorms against rare and unique enemies. And then for clearing, we're going to jump from pack to pack, leaving behind Sandstorms to clear normal and magic monsters. It's really important to note here that you want to let the Sandstorm finish enemies off. The build is going to feel extremely slow to play if you aren't making use and taking advantage of the Lingering Storm mechanic to deal with multiple packs of enemies at once. So once you swap to Bladestorm, start by using it in a 3-link red-red-green setup with Fortify and Close Combat support, and then by the end of Act 4, swap into a 4-link red-red-red-green setup with Fortify, Multi-Strike, and Close Combat support. In Act 7, after Cruel Lab, swap Fortify with Brutality support, and in yellow maps, incorporate the Bloodthirst support for a 5-link red-red-red-red-green setup. With our primary skills out of the way, let's talk about movement and secondary skills. At level 4, use Dash. At level 10, after Brutus, swap out of Dash and into Leap Slam. When you have the sockets to spare, make sure to support your Leap Slam in a 3-link red-green-green setup with faster attacks and momentum support. For the more advanced players out there, you can also use a level 1 Frost Blink in combination with your Leap Slam for even more mobility. For our reservation skills, we're going to start by picking up Vitality and Precision after Brutus at level 10. We're going to keep Vitality in our stash, and we're going to use Precision for additional accuracy until we get access to the Resolute Technique Keystone. At level 24, after saving Tolman, pick up Purity of Elements. This is going to be our main aura that provides some elemental resistances, but more importantly, ailment immunity. At level 28, after swapping into Bladestorm, we're going to go back to Act 1 and pick up the Blood and Sand Stance skill. This is our method of swapping stances for Bladestorm. Blood Stance will increase our damage and reduce our area of effect, and Sand Stance will reduce our damage and increase our area of effect. At level 38, after killing Comb and Duresso, get yourself the Eternal Blessing support gem. We need to use Purity of Elements in a 2-link blue-red setup with Eternal Blessing support so that we can use our auras after swapping to Blood Magic. Once we have this setup, we can reserve a Blood and Sand on our life and incorporate Vitality into the build for some flat life regeneration. Remember to remove your Precision aura at this point if you already haven't done so. We have Resolute Technique. We don't have to worry about accuracy at this point. Neither of these skills require any support gems, so just place them in any sockets you have available in your gear and you should be good to go. Once we get to yellow maps, we will also be adding Petrified Blood to the build. This reservation skill offsets a portion of the damage we take from hits, making us lose life over time instead. This makes us tanky against multiple hits, but leaves us vulnerable against one-shot and damage over time mechanics. But since it gives us access to Overleech, Bloodthirst, and Adrenaline on demand, I think the pros significantly outweigh the cons. Last but not least, let's talk about auxiliary skills that improve our quality of life. These skills are nice to have but not mandatory, so throw them into your build as you get better gear and have access to more socket. At level 4, we get access to the War Banner skill. This generates Valor as we attack enemies, and when you place the banner down, it's going to consume the Valor to create a large area that buffs our physical damage. Place War Banner in any red socket that's available, and use it against those tanky rares and bosses. At level 24, we get access to the Vulnerability Curse. This gem provides a chance to bleed and increases the physical damage taken by enemies. Use this sparingly against the tanky rares and act bosses, once again to improve our single target DPS. At level 24, we get access to the Automation Support. This gem periodically triggers instant cast spells that have a cooldown. We want to use Automation Support in a 2-link blue-green setup with Blood Rage, which is a duration skill that's going to give us a little bit of attack speed, life leech, and more importantly, access to frenzy charges. And at level 38, we get access to cast when damage taken support. This gem is going to trigger a spell after you have taken a certain amount of damage. We use cast when damage taken support in a 2-link red-red setup with Molten Shell. This is our guard skill that's going to help mitigate damage. And that's it for skill progression. As for gear, I recommend that you have the following items. Start with a Jade Amulet for Dexterity, then transition into a Turquoise Amulet for Dex and Int. Then we're going to use 2 Stone Rings in the first half of the campaign, transitioning into Amethyst Rings in Part 2, and early maps to improve our Chaos Resists. Make sure to upgrade your flasks and stick to the base items that provide armor. For item modifiers, we want to prioritize physical damage and attack speed on our 2-handed axe. We want movement speed on boots, and as much life, armor, and resists on every other piece that you can find. If you're struggling to find a weapon upgrade, then remember that the serrated vendor recipe exists. Vendor a weapon, a blacksmith's whetstone, and a rare rustic sash to receive a magic weapon with the serrated modifier. You want to take this to your hideout crafting bench, and then you can slap on some attack speed to it. Rinse and repeat as you find better base items and work your way through the campaign. And also, don't forget to check your items for open suffixes so you can bench craft resistances. With these guidelines, you should be able to get through the campaign and white maps with relative ease. Here's some clips of what to expect if you decide to play this build. Alright guys, let's talk about passive skill tree progression. We're going to start off in Act 1 by getting physical attack damage leading to Master of the Arena. This is going to give us life regeneration, strength, and increased melee physical damage. We want more damage at this point in the game, so pick up Destroyer for increased attack speed and physical damage while you have a two-handed melee weapon equipped. Next, we want some survivability for Brutus, so go ahead and take Bravery. This is going to increase your maximum life, evasion rating, and armor. Now we need some dex, so we take up Art of the Gladiator. It'll give us 20 to dexterity, 10% to increase attack speed, and we'll also get the bonus of ignoring all movement penalties from armor. That means our characters should be a little bit quicker on their feet. We can now leave the Dealer's Start area and head towards the outer part of the tree. Go ahead and get Proficiency here for plus 30 to Dexterity. This will help you use your green gems and equip new axes as you progress through the campaign. Pick up these strength nodes and hug the left side of the tree as you head towards Resolute Technique. Alright, Resolute Technique is a keystone passive that makes it so your hits cannot be evaded. As a downside, you will never deal critical strikes, but since we do not invest into crit strike or crit damage, this is a negligible downside for our character. Instead, we're left with the net positive of not having to worry about the accuracy mod ever again. At this point, you'll want a little bit more survivability. Grab Barbarism. It increases your life and gives you a little bit of resistances to help you hit that elemental res cap when you are fighting Piety and Dominus at the end of Act 3. Now we want a little bit of damage, so go ahead and pick up these two-hand melee damage and attack speed nodes. Wrecking Ball will give you access to two-hand mastery. Here you're going to take 40% increased damage with hits against rare and unique enemies so that you can better deal with those tanky rares and beefy act bosses as you work your way through the campaign. Now is also a good time to pick up Unwavering Stance. Unwavering Stance makes it so that you cannot be stunned. The downside of this keystone passive is that you can no longer evade enemy attacks. We are playing a two-handed build, we attack slow, and we're usually surrounded by enemies. This makes it a problem when fast enemies kind of sneak in an attack and do micro-stuns that interrupt your attack. It makes the build feel terrible to play, so pick Unwavering Stance and get stun immunity so that your character is consistent and can kill stuff without being interrupted. After getting Unwavering Stance, we're going to go back to the left side of the tree. We're going to pick up Axe Damage and Attack Speed, leading to Slaughter. Slaughter also gives us access to the Rage on Hit mechanic. Rage is a stacking buff that gives you more attack damage the more rage you have. You will begin to lose rage if you haven't generated rage recently, or if the enemy has not hit you recently. Okay, so this exists to increase our sustained single target damage in prolonged fights, like boss fights in the acts, or just, tanky rares, maybe those mercenaries that are supposed to be in 3.26. This will be a really good way to scale our damage. While you're here, you might as well take Axe Mastery. I expect you to be around Act 3, comfortably swapped into Bladestorm. So we want to take 30% increased damage while in Blood Stance, and 15% increased area of effect while in Sand Stance. Now we should be entering Act 4. We want to start prepping for the transition into Blood Magic. Go ahead and take these life nodes over here. Bloodlust will make it so enemies cannot leech life from you. And then while you wait to hit level 38 so you can make the Blood Magic transition, put 2 points into the strength nodes over here, and then remove these physical attack damage nodes from Act 1. Right? These are pretty awful and inefficient nodes. They're good in Act 1, but they fall off as your character progresses later into the game. What we've done here is create an alternate path for our passive tree to still stay connected, and then we're going to spend these points that we refunded elsewhere on the tree. Alright, a good place to spend it is this physical attack damage cluster over here. Go ahead and get Bastion Breaker so that your hits have 50% chance to ignore enemy physical damage reduction. Now you should be around level 38. After killing Comb and Duresso, get the Blood Magic Keystone passive. This is going to remove all of your mana, increase your maximum life, and it's going to make it so skills cost life instead of mana and reserve life instead of mana. This is a band-aid fix to the mana problem that most characters have in the campaign. Whether or not you want to use it in the end game is up to you. I plan to keep using it, but there's going to be a lot of other options for you to solve the mana problem. So yeah, it really comes down to a personal preference at that point. Now that we have Blood Magic, we want to go back to Bastion Breaker over here. You will get access to the Physical Mastery. 40% increased physical damage with skills that cost life. Okay, blood magic makes it so our skills cost life, and physical mastery makes it so skills that cost life deal more damage. Alright, pretty self-explanatory. We want to improve our survivability a little bit, so let's take these life nodes leading to Golem's Blood. Golem's Blood also gives you life regeneration. Then we want to pick up Armor and Evasion leading to Cloth and Chain. This will give us elemental resistances as well as some increased evasion rating and armor. More importantly, we'll get access to the Armor and Evasion Mastery, which will give us immune to bleeding if equipped helmet has higher armor than evasion rating. Just please make sure to open your inventory, check your helmet slot, and make sure you are using a armor hat, okay? Otherwise, this doesn't work and you're just wasting a point. Once we have Armor and Evasion Mastery, it's time for us to start investing into Impale chants. So go over here to the Axe Cluster, and to the right side, you're going to see some Impale nodes. Alright, pick up the Impale nodes and pick Harpooner. And then you're going to go toward the right side of Proficiency, and you're going to get these Chance to Impale nodes over here, leading up to Merciless Skewering. Once you have these nodes, you should have roughly 80% chance to impale. Go ahead and get Impale Mastery so we can get our impale damage to ignore enemy physical damage reduction. Right? That means your impale will always be dealing the highest damage possible, and it won't get mitigated by things like armor or endurance charges and anything that reduces physical damage. Right, once you have this Impale node over here, we can get a little bit more chance to impale down here. You want to get Brutal Skewering so that your impales last one additional hit. Like I mentioned earlier, I will be talking in detail about how the impale mechanic works, so if you are confused about why we are investing so much into it, don't worry, I'll explain it all in good time. Once you have Brutal Skewering, we want to start investing into Leech as a defensive mechanic. Pick up Life Leech leading into Hematophagy over here. Then we're going to get Leech Mastery and make it so that 25% increase maximum total life recovery per second from Leech. I will also explain what this does when we go over Leech mechanics and how Overleech works to help keep us alive. Alright, just trust me on this, pick it up, it's real good stuff. Once you have that Leech node over there, I think you want to head over to the Axe Cluster over here. So we picked up Slaughter last time. You now have the option of taking these efficient axe damage nodes and getting Cleaving, or more likely what you'll probably do, since they buffed the hell out of Fortify, is you'll go over to this Fortification Cluster next to Bloodless. Alright, it's over here in the passive skill tree. And then you'll pick up Maximum Fortification and Steadfast. Alright? I'll change the POB if we decide to go this route, but it's 4 points you get to spend on either Fortify or Damage. So let's keep this for now. Alright, and then once you have that, we're going to go up over here. We're going to get two-hand melee damage and Leech. Alright, Martial Experience is also going to give you 30% chance to ignore enemy physical damage reduction. Then you want to get this Dex node over here and head to the Marauder side of the tree. You want to get Warrior's Blood for increased life regeneration and some strength. You want to get Heart of the Warrior for increased maximum life, and then you want to get Born to Fight for increased attack speed, strength, and increased physical damage. Alright, then we want to get two-handed melee damage and stun duration, so go ahead and get all of these nodes leading to kinetic impacts. This is going to give you a 5% chance to deal double damage, and then we want to take two-hand mastery and get 3% chance to deal triple damage. Alright, you want to spend your points on these melee area of effect nodes over here, get Brinkmanship, and then that'll give you access to attack mastery. Then you want to get monsters cannot block your attacks. So once you have this, you can spend the rest of your points leading into the Scion Life Wheel Cluster over here. So this will get Constitution for increased maximum life. And then with the remaining points, you want to get Juggernaut over here, and then start spending your points on life nodes that are efficient. So these ones gives you 6 each, and then this one gives you 6. And then once you have those, you can fill out the cluster in the Scion Life Wheel. This will be 5 each. Alright, and then you could get like the 4 life nodes over here. These are life and armor nodes. Those are really good. And then I think you can also get life and armor here. And that should be it. Alright, there's a jewel slot here you can take if you happen to find a good jewel. So in that case, you would just spend, instead of getting these small life and armor nodes, you would just take the jewel slot instead. Okay? And then another thing you can do is we're going to use our Anoint to get Forceful Skewering. This is going to give us even more chance to impale and increase impale effect. If and when that happens, what you can do is you can respec out of these chance to impale nodes, and then you can take impale effect instead. You should still have 100% chance to impale your enemies, okay? So that is what we'll do once we get our Anoint. So all in all, with everything said and done, this is what the passive tree looks like. So we'll lock it in. We didn't talk about our Ascendancy, so let's do that real quick. In normal lab, you're going to be getting Master of Metal. This is going to let your impales last one additional hit. It's also going to give you a massive amount of armor and flat damage when you impale an enemy, okay? In Cruel Lab, you're going to want to get Fortitude. This is going to give you maximum fortification in patch 3.26. And then in Merciless Lab, you're going to get the Unstoppable Hero, which will also be buffed to give you more armor, evasion rating, and attack speed when your fortification surpasses the baseline cap. So the baseline cap is 20. If you have like 30 fortification, you're gonna have, you know, 30% more armor, 30% more evasion. So that'll be the new Unstoppable Hero node that I can't quite show you in this version of the game. Right, your last Ascendancy point in Uber Lab will be unlocked in Yellow Maps. You will get First to Strike, Last to Fall, and then you will swap into the low life version of the build that uses Petrified Blood. Alright, that will give you access to the Adrenaline buff from this Ascendancy and the Bloodthirst support gem for your Bladestorm, and then you'll get a ton of flat added damage from that. So I think I got everything, guys. I have done like literally 5 takes of this crap trying to get everything explained proper. So let's lock this in, let's apply the points, and then we can slot in our gear and make sure everything is working as intended. So let me very quickly do that. We'll put in our rare items and our belt and our boots. Why can't I use this? Ugh. Alright, I'll remove this real quick, put this on, and then I can put on the blue gems that I didn't have the requirements for. So if we go to our hideout, we'll turn on all our auras, make sure everything is in check. Here is Automate, here is Blood and Sand, here is Purity of Elements, here is Petrified Blood, here is Vitality. I have a button for my War Banner. Don't worry about the Enduring Cry here. So we'll zoom in, we'll check our chance to impale. So this is Bloodstorm. Alright. This is above 100%, that's perfect. And then we can check our life. We have 6,440 life. And then once you have the low life effect going, you'll have 3,330 life, but you'll have Petrified Blood, so your EHP should be a lot higher than that. Alright, and yeah, that is it for the passive skill tree section of this video. Let's talk about how we're scaling damage, guys. First of all, this is a pure physical damage build. That means we are only using physical damage. You cannot use elemental or chaos. It won't work with the way we've decided to scale our damage. Alright, second of all, this is a hit damage build. We are not using ailments. We are not using bleed. We are not using damage over time. We're using damage from our hits when we attack enemies. Alright, the best way to scale physical hit damage in Path of Exile 1 is by using the Impale mechanic. We're going to get Impale with passives in our passive skill tree. So if I type in Impale, you'll see here that we have a cluster here, we have a cluster here, and I think we have one more cluster of Impale over here. Okay, some of you guys might not know what Impale is, so let's read what the game has to tell us. Alright, when an impaled enemy is hit, the Impale reflects 10% of the physical damage of the impaling hit to that enemy. Impale lasts for 5 hits or 8 seconds. That's not very helpful if you don't really understand what they're talking about. So let me break it down to you the best I can. The first thing we need to do to scale our damage with Impale is get chance to impale on hit. Alright, from our passives, we have a 100% chance to impale with main hand hit. So every time we hit the enemy, right, we swing our weapon, we do our Bladestorm, we are causing an impale when they get hit. Alright, so what exactly is an Impale? Impale is a debuff, and like the tooltip says, it lasts for 5 hits. So when you apply an Impale to an enemy, you can hit them 5 times, and each time it's going to proc the Impale. So what happens when you proc your Impale? It takes 10% of the hit damage that caused the Impale, and it deals that to the enemy. So I'll give you an example. I'm fighting a monster, and I hit it for 1000 physical damage. This is an impaling hit, and it causes an Impale debuff on the enemy. That Impale stores 10% of our damage, so 10% of 1000 is 100 damage. Okay, so for the next 5 times I hit that enemy, it is going to proc that Impale, dealing 100 damage each time. So if I hit it once, I've dealt 100 Impale damage. If I hit it twice, I've dealt 200 Impale damage. And then 3, 4, 5. By the time we get to 5 hits and the Impale debuff is consumed, we've done a total of 500 damage from Impale, on top of the 1000 damage we dealt with our initial hit. Alright, so right off the bat, having a 100% chance to Impale is a 50% damage multiplier for your physical attack builds. But we can actually improve that by a large margin. How do we do that? Well, we do that with our passives once again. Okay, I'm going to show you this one over here. So this is Forceful Skewering. I decided to anoint this. It gives us chance to Impale, which is nice, but it also increases Impale effect. So with a 10% increase Impale effect, instead you are storing 11% of your initial hit damage. So increased Impale effect means that you are storing more damage and then dealing more damage when you proc the Impale. Right, how else can we scale Impale damage, guys? Well, we can do it by increasing the number of Impales that are inflicted. So normally, Impale lasts 5 hits. You take something like Brutal Skewering, now Impales last 6 hits. Okay, so instead of going 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, it now goes up to 600. So now it is a 60% more damage multiplier as long as you have 100% chance to Impale. Right, another way we're going to increase the number of Impales we can inflict is through our Ascendancy. This is Master of Metal. Impales you inflict last 1 additional hit. This combined with the passive I just showed you means we are now at 7 hits for our Impale. Alright, more importantly, we have a buff here. You and nearby allies deal 6 to 12 added physical damage for each Impale on the enemy. So times that number by 7, and that is how much flat physical damage we are getting against enemies that are impaled. Okay, so that's Master of Metal in a nutshell, and hopefully that explains how Impale works and why we're using it to scale the damage on our build. Alright, with Impale out of the way, what should I talk about next? We are also getting a lot of flat damage from a very particular support gem. This is Bloodthirst Support. Supported attacks deal added physical damage with weapons equal to 2% of your maximum life while on low life. So our character here, you can see, has 6,442 life. 2% of that is 129 flat physical damage. The only requirement for this to work is that you are on low life. Later on, when I activate my auras, I'm going to show you how we get the build to low life and why it's actually a fantastic thing for this type of build. Alright, how are we going to proc Adrenaline, guys? This is where low life shines. So you can see here, I have 45% of my life reserved, and Petrified Blood makes it so that you can never heal back up to above 50% of your life. Okay, so I'm going to start attacking here. You'll notice my life slowly begins to drop. Right? Eventually, it's going to drop until I have exactly 50% reserved, and that little 5%, you see that little sliver of emptiness underneath my reserved life and above my actual life? That portion of my life can only be topped up by using a life flask. We cannot leech, we cannot regen, we cannot recover life to get above that unless we use this life flask. Now you're probably thinking, why the hell is that important? Well, if you look at Last to Strike, First to Fall, that's not what it's called, but if you look at this Ascendancy, it procs when you hit low life. Okay, so for demonstration purposes, I took out automate support just so I can cast Blood Rage while we're in King's March. So how do we get to low life, guys? I'll put on Blood Rage here so it starts draining my HP. Okay, and remember, life regeneration cannot heal you above this 50% mark, okay? So I use a health pot that puts me at 55% HP, and then Blood Rage drains me down to 50%, and as soon as that happens, Adrenaline is now active for 20 seconds. Okay, so you have Adrenaline on demand with this build, which is actually just insane. I'm going to do it once again, just for demonstration. Okay, so you can see I have no Adrenaline, I'm at 50% HP, I use something like Blood Rage that drains my HP, and then I top my HP up to 55%, and as soon as it drops back to 50, bam, Adrenaline is active. Hey, this is going to be up all the time while you're mapping. It's one of the reasons the build is so fast. Alright guys, let's very quickly start with belt progression. So coming out of the campaign and headed into white maps, you're going to have a rare belt most likely. Aim for maximum life and elemental resistances as the modifiers. Good base items for this is the Rustic Sash, which gives you global fist damage, and the leather belt, which gives you maximum life. When you finish white maps and head into yellow maps, you're going to want to buy a belt upgrade. You can either buy a rare from someone if it's affordable, aim for something that has 100 plus to maximum life, as well as 90 plus to a various assortment of resists. If at all possible, try and squeeze in the armor modifier there. That will make for a very good rare belt that is useful in the yellow maps. If uniques is more your style, try the Belt of the Deceiver. This is going to give you increased global fizz damage, make you take reduced extra damage from critical strikes, give you a little bit of strength and life, and a lot of elemental resistances. It also has the nearby enemies are intimidated modifier on it. Unfortunately for us, we are getting intimidation from other sources on our build that makes enemies take 10% increased attack damage, so that modifier on this belt for this build is not as good as it could be. Alright, if the Belt of Deceiver is not your cup of tea, try Meganord's Girdle instead. This is going to give you flat fizz damage, increased max life, and a little bit of cold resistance as well as strength. As we finish up yellow maps and head into red maps, we're going to want to save up for a massive belt upgrade. Now, normally the Perseverance unique belt is not a lucrative item, but unfortunately for us, the champion is getting a lot of buffs and therefore attention. A lot of people are mentioning Fortify stacking champions as a possible endgame build. That means that this belt is a very important puzzle piece in that build, and people are going to inflate the price if it ends up being the meta. So keep an eye out for that. We do want this belt because it has the You Have Onslaught While Fortified modifier. Alright, so that is the Perseverance unique belt, which we will be using or trying to use. And if this is too expensive, you can have a look at the Magnate Studded belt instead. This gives you a lot of elemental resists, a lot of strength, and it makes it so you have a chance to deal double damage and triple damage if you have at least 200 and 400 strength respectively. Personally though, I prefer the Perseverance for the Onslaught effect. That means I can use a Quartz Flask here instead of a Silver Flask, and it's just nice to have permanent Onslaught, so that is what I will be going for. Alright, for glove progression, guys, you're probably finishing campaign and entering white maps with some trash to your gloves. It's going to have life, it's going to have resists. If it's a rare item, you might end up having multiple resistances, right? So that is sufficient for white map progression. When you get into yellow maps and red maps, you're going to want to swap that into a unique pair of gloves. We have two choices here. We can either use Hemophilia Serpent Scale Gauntlets, or we can use Asenath's Gentle Touch Silk Gloves. Both of these do similar things, just in different ways. So for Hemophilia, we're going to get increased chance to cause bleeding, and then you're going to get bleeding enemies you kill explode. That's your corpse removal in the form of these gloves. And then for Asenath's Gentle Touch, it's going to curse enemies with temporal chains on hit, and then it's going to make enemies that die near enemies that are cursed explode. That's your corpse removal via Asenath's Gentle Touch. The use case for either or really depends. Like Asenath's Gentle Touch could be very expensive due to the mercenaries. I imagine you could slap this onto your merc and they're going to basically give you this effect for free. So Hemophilia might be a lot cheaper. Also, Asenath's Gentle Touch gives you some intelligence that helps you meet the requirements for Purity of Elements. It also gives you a little bit of life, and it gives you a curse when you might not otherwise have a curse to use. This does mean that you can't use vulnerability or punishment for extra damage, but I really didn't find that to be a problem. In the end game, I'd probably use Hemophilia Corrupted to give you vulnerability on hit. That's going to give you like 50% chance to bleed enemies, and then if you can get another bleed mod somewhere, you could incorporate bleed into your build fairly consistently. And we all know that Bladestorm has a big bonus to damage with bleeding, so that'll be a nice DPS boost as well. For our jewelry progression, we are probably going to be finishing the campaign and entering white maps with amethyst rings and a turquoise amulet. Your goal is to get a maximum life modifier as well as some resistances that you need to cap your resists and get as close to 0% chaos resist as possible. You know, more the better. These are pretty easy to make on the crafting bench. Just find an item that has one of the modifiers like life or resist, and then you bench craft whatever is missing. If they are rare, you might have the ability to slap on another resist. That's going to alleviate the gearing pressure on your other pieces of gear. As you enter yellow maps, we're going to upgrade our amethyst rings. You can see here that this one has a higher max life roll, more chaos resists, and then a second all elemental resist modifiers as well. This one is very similar. You'll see that there's dead mods here like mana and cast speed and cold damage to attacks. That's just how it goes. You're not looking for perfect items here, just something to help you progress the Atlas. You can also swap into the Carnage Heart Amulet. This is an excellent amulet for the mid-game progression. It's going to give you the attributes you need to use Purity of Elements, and it's also going to give you some attack damage leached as life, and it's going to give you this very annoying extra gore modifier. Personally, that gives me performance issues. That's why I don't use this unique. Instead, I just use the crappy magic or rare item instead, but that will be good enough to get you through yellow maps. As we head into red maps, it's time to start investing into our jewelry. You either need to buy items that have been crafted by other players, or you're going to have to craft things yourself. The important mods on these items is a high maximum life roll and 2 high resistance rolls. You're going to want to keep the third suffix open so you can craft the minimum endurance charge, craft onto it from your crafting bench. Alright, each one of my jewelry pieces has this modifier on it. Some of them have things like damage taken recouped as life. It's really up to you how much you want to invest onto this, but these items were good enough to get me through red map progression. Alright, remember that the life node makes us more tanky, and it also helps us deal more damage through the Bloodthirst support. And I'll put this on real quick. You'll see that my character has a bunch of endurance charges just passively from having the jewelry equipped. For our Anoint, we are going with Forceful Skewering. I mentioned this in the passive tree section. This is right here on the tree. It's going to give you 15% chance to impale enemies on hit with attacks and 10% increase impale effect. The oils you need for this is Verdant, Azure, and Violet. So here it is, Verdant, Azure, Violet. Should be pretty cheap in terms of affordability. And yeah, if you're wondering how to make these type of jewelry on your own, I'll post a quick gear update guide when the league is live. These have been harvest crafted using yellow life force. I guess we can just go here and I'll show you the craft if nothing else. So if you type in Chaos in the Hoarder crafting bench, you're going to get Reforge a rare item with random modifiers, including a Chaos modifier. For rings and amulets, this is exclusively going to guarantee the Chaos resistance modifier. So you just keep pressing this button and spending these life forces, which, you know, could be expensive at that time of the league, but it's going to keep re-rolling until you land the maximum life modifier and have an open suffix, and then you slap on that minimum endurance charges and you're good to go. For our Helm, Boots, and Armor progression, you're going to finish the campaign and be doing your yellow maps with whatever rare item you can find. Focus on a high maximum life roll as per usual, and then try to get as much resistances onto these items as possible. You can see here that I did most of my mapping with items that have 100 life and maybe 30 resist. Alright, this one has 26 fire resist. This one actually has a lot of resistances and a good movement speed roll, so I got lucky there. But for your boots, priority number 1 is movement speed, then life, then resists. For your chest, it's going to be life, and then resists, and then you want to stack on as much armor as you can, right? Armor is just a luxury. Monsters don't hit that hard in white and yellow maps. It's not a big deal. And then for your hat, same deal as the armor. You're going to want maximum life as your top priority, and then some resists, and then armor. And as you work your way into red maps, you're going to want to invest into the new base types. So these are the level 84 armor bases. We have Giant Slayer Helmet, we have Royal Plate, and we have Leviathan Greaves. All of them will be item level 84 or higher, and the goal here is to use essences to craft them. You're going to use a resistance essence that guarantees a tier 1 resist, and you're going to spam those essences until you get a high tier life roll, and then preferably some other stats like percentage armor, or in the case of your boots, you want movement speed. I didn't mention links, I kind of forgot. So in your white and yellow maps, I've designed the build so that it can be comfortably played with a 4-link setup. And then once you get into red maps, I do highly recommend investing into the 5-link so you can slot in Bloodthirst and deal a lot more damage. For a 6th link, that's going to be covered in the build update video. I haven't quite decided how I want to scale this into content beyond Atlas progression. There is so many ways to go about this, I just have to figure out what it is, and when I do, I will let you know. For now, I have just slotted in Frostblink in this 5-link 6-socket setup. Alright, let's very quickly talk about Eldritch Implicits. Since we are mostly using rare items, we can slap on Eldritch Implicits onto basically all of our slots. The only exception here is going to be the glove slots. I recommended using Athanaths, or we might transition into Hemophilia for the bleed and blood explosions. Alright, but just in case, I have a pair of gloves here anyways that we can kind of throw some Eldritch Ichors and Embers into. So let's start with the chest plate. That's probably the most important one. We're going to want physical damage from hits taken as any sort of element, and we also want damage taken recouped as life. Big warning here, guys, if you are using the life mastery, the implicit modifier for damage taken recouped as life counts as a life modifier, so it does not work with the 15% increase life if no life modifiers on chest. Okay, just a heads up on that. I learned that the hard way earlier today. So let's start with the blue Eater of Worlds, and then we'll finish up with the red Searing Exarchs. So let's see. Elemental resist. Okay, there you go. 10% of physical damage from hits taken as cold damage. That works. Alright, now we'll do the same with the red ones. Alright, damage taken recouped as life. Nice and neat. Alright, next we can do our boots. We're going to need some action speed for the Searing Exarch Implicits, and then we can use the Endurance Charge and Life Regeneration per second if you happen to have Endurance Charges on your build. We do, but in case you don't, I will try and find an alternative. So let's put the chest plate away, and then let's start working on the boots. Alright, there's the 4% increased action speed from the Eldritch Embers. That one is actually a pretty uncommon one, guys, so be a little bit careful when you're doing this early in the game. Each of these Embers and Ichors are pretty costly on the first launch weekend, alright? These could be like a chaos each even. So every time you use it on that, you know, if you get like 5% move speed instead, that's fine. You can min-max it later, right? Don't blow all your money on little like optimization things that are costing you more at the start than they will, you know, 1 week into the league. So now we can put our blue Ichors on, and let's see what we get. Alright, there's our Endurance Charge mod, so we'll put this away. Then let's do our helmet. This is another important one. It looks like I have physical damage taken recouped as life, as well as physical damage from hits taken as an element. So same idea here. Let's just spam some Eldritch Ichors and Embers. Alright, there's some fire damage taken recouped as life. That's not all that useful. We might want to reroll that. Alright, there we go. We have physical damage taken recouped as life. Now let's do the blue ones. Alright, we have physical damage from hits taken as chaos damage. Maybe that's not something you want to use if your chaos resistance isn't capped, so you might want to re-roll over something like that. Physical damage from hits taken as cold damage, that's perfectly fine. And then, yeah, we still have a couple of Embers and Ichors left. Let's throw it onto the gloves and see if there's anything cool we can find for maybe some of you guys that are playing SSF that don't have access to easy, unique items from the trade website. Right, attack speed, that's a pretty good one. And then we have physical damage leads his life. That is also pretty good. I know there's some really good Eldritch Implicits for gloves. You can get like Rage on Hit and all these other things. If I end up using a rare pair of gloves instead of the unique Hemophilia or Asenath's Gentle Touch, we will do a little bit more research into what implicits to use on these items. Okay, but yeah, that's Eldritch Implicits in a nutshell. Not very hard, makes a big difference in terms of your build performance. Alright, for our weapon progression, you are probably finishing campaign with a Despot Axe. It is not going to be a white item. If you can't find a good magic or rare item, you can use the vendor recipe to make yourself an upgrade. So that's going to be the white item you put in, one rare rustic sash, and one blacksmith whetstone. And this is going to give you back that same item, but it's going to have the serrated modifier on it, which increases your physical damage. So go ahead and get this, and then you're going to quality your weapon, and then you're going to take it to the crafting bench, and you're going to slap on some attack speed on it. So put it here, type in attack speed, and then for 6 alterations, you can get 8 to 10% increased attack speed. Alright, and this is going to be the weapons we use when we finish campaign, and when we start white maps. So once you are headed into yellow maps, you can purchase the Sinvicta's Metal Unique Axe. This is a pretty garbage unique, and that's why it's affordable. It's going to give you the Rampage modifier. That's going to give you cool things like increased area of effect as you continue to kill monsters, and then you'll have on-kill effects happening as you maintain that Rampage kill streak. All the footage you're seeing in this video was recorded using the Sinvicta's Metal Unique Axe, so we can do T16 maps with this. You can clear T17s, just not the bosses. The single target is not quite there. And we also did Depth 250 Delve, which is pretty impressive for a garbage tier weapon like this, if I do say so myself. Alright, so this is what you can use at the start of yellow maps leading into red maps. And then what you want to do ideally is you want to essence craft yourself a rare axe. This is an example. I'm going to show you the clip of how I crafted this. Alright, we're very quickly going to go over how to make yourself a weapon upgrade. So maybe you were using Sinvicta's Metal and it's starting to fall off as you head into the end of red maps. Alright, this is how we make an upgrade. Start with a Despot Axe. It doesn't need to be 30 quality. 20% quality is more than sufficient. If you have a lot of money to spend, use Deafening Essence of Contempt. If you are on a budget, use Shrieking Essence of Contempt instead. These essences will guarantee that the weapon you use it on has the flat physical damage modifier. Alright, what we're going for is either the attack speed suffix or the physical damage prefix. So we're going to spam these essences until we get a combination of the guaranteed essence mod alongside one of those things I just mentioned. Let's start with the Shrieking. So we use it here, we get nothing. We use it here, we get nothing. Alright, and then here we have something. We have the guaranteed razor sharp mod from the essence, and then it got comboed with the suffix modifier of renown. This increases the attack speed. Once you get something like this, just go to the crafting bench. Alright, you're going to put your axe in, and then you're going to make sure that the item has a open prefix. That part is very important. And then you're going to type in physical over here, and you're going to craft on increased physical damage for 4 chaos, okay? So this is going to turn this axe into a very respectable axe to use in red maps, and it took us a mere few minutes to craft this. Alright, in the end game, you can use recombinators to make a monster like this. If I press Alt, you'll see here that we have T1s all across the board, and then a 6th modifier that has been bench crafted. This is on a Sundering Axe for a bleed build. Imagine the same mods, but on a Despot Axe, and instead of damage over time, you're using something else like, I don't know, chance to deal double damage or something, right? Incredible axe. I think it's like 900 plus DPS. You can work wonders with this. If we can map with Sinvicta's Metal, we can map with a 900 DPS axe. Alright? Alright guys, I want to very quickly go over the Pantheons and Flasks because that's something I always forget when making these guides. For the Mercenaries League in 3.26, I recommend starting off with Soul of Lunaris. When you upgrade this, it's going to give you avoid projectiles that have chained. I'm going to assume that Mercenaries work like minions and that if they get attacked by a monster that has chain, it's going to bounce to you and then you're going to take a ton of damage. We don't want that, so take this as a precaution. And then for your Minor Pantheon, you're going to want to use Soul of Rizlata. This gives you passive life flask charge regeneration. We use life flasks on our build to proc our adrenaline. That means in an extended boss fight, if you run out of life flasks, then you can no longer use adrenaline, and then your damage and survivability falls off a cliff. We don't want that, so we're going to be using Soul of Rizlata to generate life flasks in those longer duration fights. Alright, for our flasks, I recommend using one life flask. Start off with immunity to corrupted blood, and then swap to immunity to poison when you get a jewel that has corrupted blood immunity, okay? So the other 4 flasks you can use for utility since you're blood magic. Definitely have a Quicksilver flask, definitely have a Granite flask, and then you can choose either Quartz flask for phasing, or you can use Silver Flask for Onslaught if you don't have the Perseverance Vanguard belt. Alright, apparently Champion is like the new meta or something, and everyone and their mother wants to use this belt and stack Fortify, so what I assumed would be a completely, useless cheap item is going to be in demand. So if you're unable to get this belt and can't have a permanent Onslaught while fortified, then definitely use the Silver Flask instead of the Quartz one over here. Alright, for our 4th flask, it depends on what we are doing. I'm using Sulfur Flask for Consecrated Ground that gives us 4% life regen while we stand on it, as well as some curse mitigation. You also get the 40% increased damage from the Sulfur Flask, which is really nice. I have this triggered to go off when we hit a rare or unique enemy. The other ones are just triggered when charges reach full. If you're doing Armor Evasion Hybrid Fortify stacking, you might want to replace this with a Jade Flask instead. That is yet to be determined. I really have to kind of feel that out in game. I'm not going to tell you to do something that I haven't tested out myself. So that is Flasks and Pantheons in a nutshell. Alright guys, and I think that just about wraps up everything I wanted to talk about for the Bladestorm Champion League starter. I was going to do a little bit of an FAQ here, questions I see come up a lot in my other videos, but unfortunately this video is already almost an hour long, so I am just going to cut it there. In terms of what is happening on Friday the 13th, we're going to be league starting this build ourselves. You can expect daily update videos, and if the build lives up to its expectations, we will be finding some interesting ways to scale the damage and maybe try out some juiced content or some uber bossing. I don't know yet, right? We'll see where things goes. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in game on Friday the 13th. Have fun. Bye.